As many. Chair recognizes the honourable member for Fox Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Do you need a lector? Or?
I had made this point earlier about the curious disposition of the opposition speakers with regard to immigration matters. The Prime Minister, and this is the point at which the speaker before me just finished, the Prime Minister explained in some detail what his position is as chairman of the Immigration Board with regard to the exercise of the discretion on the question of permanent residence and other powers exercised by the Immigration Board. And it came up in the context of the discussions that had been advanced by several members in connection with the developer at Bahama. I think this statement by the Prime Minister was fairly clear. The problem I have is that the opposition rose up in righteous indignation. They said at some developer who was supposedly threatened by me, the Minister for Immigration. I must confess that I have amnesia on that point. And maybe they can point me to the evidence of that. But having taken that position, I will use it for the time being as a declaration against their interest. Because last week, if I recall, two of them, and now the third, has indicated that the Minister for Immigration ought to exercise his powers to throw someone out of the country. Something they were righteously indignant about not so long ago.
They're friends and lovers.
Yes, I just want to say, Mr. Speaker, that there's an axiom in law, principle in law, that he who grants can also revoke. And no benefit which is conferred under the Immigration Act or the citizenship laws comes without that power of revocation. And I did one thing only that I would admit to and remember in Fox Hill, and that is to quote from Section 18 of the Immigration Act. And I can quote it in extenso. There is a principle upon which such an act must be taken. And the Cabinet has had to face decisions of this nature within the recent times and has made various decisions with regard to them. But all of them have been developed studiously and deliberately because of what the Prime Minister said when he spoke, the Right Honourable Member for Centreville, that this is not something that you want in the public domain, that you exercise willy-nilly. No country wants that. We believe this is a very valuable place to live. You've heard me argue that the pricing point for the right to live here is too low. And I know it's too low for a number of reasons. If you're the managing director of an organization in this country, and we're having discussions about this pricing point now, you pay $12,000 for the right to work here for 1 year. And yet, you can get permanent residence in this country, which means that you can stay here for your lifetime for $10,000. 1 year for $12,000, the rest of your life for $10,000. So you have to look at the pricing points. And we know that the country is becoming a more and more valuable place that people want to live in. I gave the example in an earlier communication. That in the Rufa case, the condo owners at where this man is a director have been given a special assessment, I'm advised, of a $500,000 fee to defend his right to stay here in the Bahamas. $500,000. It's a valuable place to live in and to stay in, if you're going to spend that kind of money to fight to stay here. So we shouldn't think about this as a joke at all. And as Prime Minister, Right Honourable Member said, that this is something that's done with deliberation. So, as I said, I'm glad to see that they found religion on this subject, and I'll come back to it. To tie off another loose end, just to reiterate for the public how we got to this discussion on the question of Save the Bays and who paid for what. The Member of Parliament for Marathon objected to a statement which was entered into the record by the member for Killarney on the question of corruption in government. There was an omnibus statement made by the member for Killarney that members of the government were corrupt, or words to that effect. He objected to it. And he said, my words, not his, that they'd rue the day that it was allowed in, because we would have to fight back. And since it was a life and death situation, politically and figuratively speaking, we would have to fight hard to rescue our reputation. So that's why we're here today. He happens to be in Martinique. His son is the captain of the swim team, and the Carifta swim team. Carifta swim team expects to win for the Bahamas again this year, and we wish them all well, the parents and the children down there. And he issued a statement this morning, Mr. Speaker, in which he said that he's read with interest the various public statements either on social media or the printed press by persons mentioned in the House of Assembly on Thursday past. I stand by my statement. I have handed what I have over to the police on Friday past. It appears that all of the individuals involved are more concerned about how I came about the information as opposed to the damning information contained in those documents. Interestingly, not one of them has denied that funds from a U.S. nonprofit were used for a purpose outside of its original mandate. All I see and have read are these individuals distancing themselves from it. I reiterate, follow the money. For my purposes, the matter now rests with the police, the Attorney General's office, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, signed Jerome Fitzgerald. A couple of points there. So he stands by the statement. Now, there's a very important legal point that he makes within this statement. And that important legal point is, interestingly, not one of them has denied that funds from a U.S. nonprofit were used for a purpose outside its original mandate. I'll explain something to the Bahamian public. When you become a charity, a registered charity, whether here in the Bahamas or in the United States or other common law countries, you become a charity for specific purposes. And that gives you tax exemption amongst other benefits. You're not subject to the normal tax rules. We probably hear most about this in the United States. And I'm advised that the particular vehicle that facilitated the payments to Save the Bays is a registered nonprofit or charity under the laws of the United States of America. So like all common law countries, these trusts or charitable organizations are confined to their purposes. And normally speaking, one does not involve oneself in political activities if you are a registered charitable trust. So the question which the member is asking and begging is, and for all purposes nothing else really matters, was the money which was advanced from this trust in the United States, was it used for the purposes which it was, for which it was designed and set aside and had to be spent within the confines of the laws of the United States. And if it deviated outside of those laws, then the authorities in the United States, especially the Revenue or Tax Service, would want to know why, and there has to be an accounting for it. That's the legal point, and people should not forget it. Now, what is the prima facie evidence of that? Well, we've got lots of examples. I used, when I was speaking, the expression, the usual suspects. You know, people ask me all the time, what have you done so and so? What have you done this and that? And I have tried to explain it in many different ways. I've reduced it down to this expression. I call it, in some cases, an unnatural infatuation. An unnatural infatuation. You know, Arthur Hanna, when he was the Deputy Prime Minister, could always get the predecessor of the editor in this of the present Tribune to write a 20-part series on any subject by simply getting up and saying something about him. I think one time he got up and said that the editor was of African descent. Yeah. And that really upset the editor. So he had a 20-part series to show why he wasn't of African descent. So we know. Well, I mean, I didn't know what's wrong with being of African descent, but anyhow, that isn't my business for the present purpose. But you know, every time I want to get a charge out of the present editor, I just have to say something about her, and then she goes off the deep end. When I landed in one of these trips for which the member for Montague is so envious, said that I was told by our High Commissioner, Mr. Speaker, that the editor of the Tribune had written 3 editorials about me one day after the next. So I was surprised. And I went back and I actually counted them. And yes, 1, 2, 3. And then there were 3 others in the week after that. So it was 6 altogether. You know, Fred Mitchell this, Fred Mitchell that, and so on and so forth, and burning the Constitution, and blah, 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 blah. Threw everything into the mix. I call it an unnatural infatuation. So that's one, the usual suspects. Eileen Carrick. Fred Smith, a special category, all his own. Mocks God, gets on his knees and says, signs the cross. Says, I hope Fred Mitchell, dear God, you know, I hope he never becomes Prime Minister, and worse, I hope he doesn't win Fox Hill. God will not be mocked. I said it then. So that's number 2, suspect number 2. Number 3, Adrian Gibson. I don't know how I actually got in that one, but there was a reference made in a column, and the column is spread over 2 pages. And in the column, an allegation is made that I, as Minister of Foreign Affairs, did not act properly in the face of certain requests from someone whose son had died in custody in Haiti. That's the allegation. Now, he references in his column a number of emails. There we go with that word again, emails. I wonder how he got them. Maybe they were unauthorized, and maybe I ought to get an injunction to stop people from using them. But fine. See, like the Right Honourable Prime Minister, I'm very much aware that the former Homeland Security Secretary Mike Churton in the States said, you know, remember, emails never disappear. So when you write them, you got to know that they're going to end up in public. And I assume in my life nothing is private. So that's the way I operate. So anyway, when you read the emails, though, it undercuts the very story that he's trying to present, because it actually says every time the lady wrote to me, I responded within minutes of getting it. I forwarded it on to the officials. I indicated that there was something that needed to be investigated, and the officials dealt with it. I spoke with the officer who was down there. He told me all the steps which he had taken to deal with this matter. In fact, he said that when the death occurred, the family itself objected to an autopsy in Haiti. So we were quite nonplussed as to why this is. But none of that concerned me until there was a paragraph in the story which said that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs facilitated bribes to officials in Haiti.
That's no problem.
So, now, we're flabbergasted by this. What we know is that people came to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and asked us to send monies to lawyers in Haiti. We don't know anything about any bribes. And that's the only thing we answered. So we issue a statement in response to it, indicating that he was wrong. So what does he do? He changed the subject. Oh, you didn't answer this, you didn't answer that, so on and so forth. And my point to that is, look, I'm not concerned about whether you think I performed as minister or I didn't perform, so on and so on. All of that is fair comment. What I am concerned about is when you start talking about something unlawful. And that's the only thing I have a responsibility to answer. So that's suspect number 3, Adrian Gibson. And, Mr. Speaker, I got a letter, which I would like to lay over as well, from family members of one of the persons who was imprisoned, disassociating themselves from the allegations which are made in the Adrian Gibson column, saying that they had nothing to do with it, they don't support it, and that it is not something which they support. And at the appropriate point, I'd try and lay it over. Got mixed up in some of the papers here. So there's that. Now, that's number 3, or that's number 4? You got 4. Who else is there? Larry Smith. Well, you know, I used to work with him at the Bahamas Information Services a long time ago. And I must not know my place or something or other, you know. So he says in his column that I wear dark shades because I want to look like an agent, a secret agent or something. So publishes this picture of me in shades, you know. Yeah. The doctors have told me, yeah, I got it. The doctors have told me if you want to save your eyes from having to have cataract operations, you wear shades which block the sunlight. That's the way I wear shades. That's it. For the same reason one assumes he wears that hat, because people with fair skin have to block the sun from shining on their face because it causes skin cancer. No more, no less. But no, I want to be a secret agent. So that's Larry Smith. So that's number 4. That's number 5? Yeah, so it's usually 5 of them. And you could, oh yeah, Candia Dames. How could I forget? The lovely Candia Dames. The lovely Candia Dames. You know, if I say A, it's going to be B. If I say C, it's going to be D. So you accept all of this with a certain equanimity. When you see the usual suspects respond, you just don't get upset or agitated because you know it's the usual suspects. Now, why I said it that way is because when you look, Mr. Speaker, at the various things that have happened, the Rufa case, all the immigration cases, the Save the Bays cases, all of them involve, in one way or another, the usual suspects. All of them. And there's a rule in law of evidence. You know, normally they don't allow you to enter things of similarity as as truth of something having happened. But there's something called similar fact evidence. When it shows up in a patent all the time, you can apply to the court and have an exception made to put it in. So that's what I'm doing in this case. I'm saying, if this group shows up everywhere, every time, on the same thing, Americans have this thing, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's got to be a duck. Don't fool yourself. It's a duck. That's the case the member for Marathon was laying out with regard to Save the Bays. He says, you can come to me and say, oh, this is an environmental organization. That's what Mr. Bacon is saying in the newspaper this morning. This is an environmental organization. So you ask yourself.
But since he said that, you only see a page.
No, ask yourself. This is the last one they had.
That's the last page last week.
Election coming soon. Who's paying for it?
That's an environmental group.
This is an environmental group now. Election? Environmental groups are concerned about elections? That's what they're concerned about? And then inside, all of it is cartoons and caricatures of a political nature, making allegations of activity which is somehow unlawful or borderline. Then the back, a nation for sale. And then they put NIGOD. So this is an environmental group now. This is an environmental group. So I'm saying, prima facie, it appears to me, Mr. Speaker, that this group has wandered outside the limits of the trust laws, the charitable laws. That's the point we are making here. And if that is so, they must be made to account for it. And if that is so, then the source of money must be cut off. And if that is so, then they ought to go public with their views and say, we are a political advocacy organization, and we are trying to overthrow the PLP as the government of the Bahamas. So he's saying, come clean. We know exactly then how to fight. Until then, we have to fight tooth and nail to make sure that the public is not hoodwinked, bamboozled, fixed, any word you want to use, to get fooled that this is the case. And that's the case we put with regard to this matter. And I repeat the point. Two things. The point is made that the emails that have now become the subject of discussion were obtained contrary to the data protection laws. Now, you know, this is amazing. The same people who say, oh, the bottom of this is what their mantra is. Transparency in politics. That's their mantra. Transparency in politics. Now, transparency means they want to see everything.
But they don't want to show that.
And now, the people who want to see everything, you told me I can't say they run like, yeah, that was sexist. I agree. I shouldn't say that, right?
Thank you, Honourable.
I shouldn't have said that this morning. I won't.
Thank you.
But, you know, you want to run to court. Say, oh, my. These people looking at my bank accounts, they got my emails. How they get to teeth this, you know. They're not denying that the money actually passed hands. They just say, how you get that? Who told you that?
Stop talking about it.
Yeah, stop talking about it. Don't spread it, so on and so forth. The problem with that is that of all the possibilities which exist, the one thing which they don't allow for is the fact that it might have been authorized. How about that? Could have been unauthorized, that's true. Could have been hacked, could have been stolen, so on and so forth. But it might have been authorized.
Same fellas walking with lawnmower get 500,000.
It might have been authorized. But nobody counts that possibility. But yet, an allegation is being made against a minister of the government that he, in effect, stole documents from a private citizen. That's a serious allegation. Serious allegation. So that's our case. Our case is, if you are a charitable organization, you should be confined. Monies are supposed to be spent in a particular way, and you should not exceed. Right. That's the case. It's very curious that since happened, we've had two resignations. Two resignations, if the press is to be believed, from the list of directors of Save the Bays. Michael Pintard, who I gather has resigned as chair of the F&M and as a senator. A grand gesture on his part, but he knows why he resigned. The language.
Honourable, yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah. The language was great. It's great. You know, oh boy, I want to be Shakespearean, you know. It's a wise and honorable man, and will no doubt with reasons answer you. Oh boy. So he's gone. And then I just saw a post on Facebook, if we can rely on Facebook, next to a very pretty picture of Diane Phillips. And she says, you know, I'm gone. These are my words now. She says, I'm gone from Save the Bays, you know. But it ain't got nothing to do with this thing going on now.
No.
It's a matter of principle. You know, I'm a professional, you know. So I think it's just in my best interest to move on. And I agree.
He was in the next meeting.
I agree. Here's what I say about that. All who protest that they don't know nothing, and you know they had nothing to do with me, and so on and so forth, and righteously indignant about all of it. I'm sorry to be using law all the time, but this, you know, this is my most recent academic background, so forgive me. They taught me something called negligence. You know, the law of negligence. And one of the things it says is that you can close your eyes to the obvious risk. You can close your eyes to the obvious risk. In trust law, they say you should be put on inquiry. So what that would mean in this context for me is this. Why would, I said this in another place, if you're looking for funding for political advocacy in this country, there are about 4 different sources legitimately you can get money from in this country. You know, it's a small country, so if you see money popping up from someplace, you know it got to come from somewhere within the country. All right. One is Lyford Key, Albany, Old Fort Bay, the people out there, and their interest in the peace and good order of the Bahamas. That's one place it could come from. Next place is what Ivan Johnson calls the White Knights. You know, they largely fund our friends opposite. And then you have 1 or 2 black businessmen who help and support the progressive cause. So that's 3. And then you have recently the people who are in the gaming business. So that's 4 different sources. Now, anytime you see money popping up that cannot be traced to sources other than those sources, which are the ones we regularly recognize as legitimate and normal, something ought to, a bell ought to go off in your head. Where is this money coming from? Where is it coming from? That's what I mean by put you on inquiry. So if you're spending all of a sudden $60,000 a week to do one of these things in the Tribune should be put on inquiry. The PR people and advertising people should be on inquiry. Mm-hmm. Everybody should be on inquiry. Where is the money coming from? And is this a legitimate aim? And why is it being done? No, instead you're content to ignore it, say, oh, I'm just a PR executive. I'm just a director of Save the Bays, and you know, I'm just a this and I'm just a that. And you go off and merrily bank and spend the money, not put an inquiry on anything. But, you know, every time they talk about progressive liberal party and tracing us to corruption, they always start with the Commission of Inquiry of 1984. Oh, the Commission of Inquiry of 1984 said this and that and so on and so forth. Except you could go to another Commission of Inquiry. You know, and I say that's the reason why we've gotten into this in our politics, this scandal and counter-scandal. You see, because poor them, you know, and I say this to Eileen Karen and them. I say, you know, the problem is Pinling defeated you in '67, man. That's history. You can't do nothing about it. You could talk about him as bad as you want and say all kind of things after the fact. The fact is that little short man beat you in '67 and you can't do nothing about it. That's right. And he's the father of the nation, took us into independence, majority rule. There's nothing you can do about that. No. But you see, people are angry because what happened? They exposed how one man was the Minister of Tourism, the minister responsible for gaming, but also the lawyer for the people applying for the gaming license.
Same time.
Yeah. Took a consultancy fee, paid legal fees, so on and so forth, and then took off his hat as lawyer, stepped into the cabinet and say, bam, I agree. License granted. I approve. I approve. Yes, I approve. With the stroke of a pen.
But they don't call that corruption.
No, that's not corruption.
Got a different face.
Yeah, right. And then the one that I like, and Arthur Hammond used to always talk about this one, says, you know, the Commission of Inquiry says how the editor of the Tribune at the time had such anti-gaming zeal, was against gambling. And then the Port Authority decided that he should be a consultant for $10,000. So they send him the check for $10,000, says, you are now our consultant. He writes Stafford Sands, who's the minister, and says, dear Stafford, I can't understand what they're sending me this check for. You know, what would I be doing? He says, but anyway, since you insist that I take it, I'll take it. Because I could give it to my charity. My favorite charity is the Crippled Children's Fund. And God bless him. And the point the Deputy Prime Minister at the time used to make is, you can't say by giving something to a charity that it didn't benefit you. He says, that's $10,000 you didn't have to take out of your pocket to give to the charity. Yes. So you're a beneficiary. And then the Commission of Inquiry says, guess what? Suddenly, all the zeal about gaming sort of disappeared. Never heard another word about it. And this is the group now that wants to lecture us about morality and ethics and corruption and so on and so forth. That's them. Amazing. Amazing. Anyway, the letter, Mr. Chimp, says this. She's writing to the Permanent Secretary. Tribune article of 25th February 2016. I trust you are doing well. I write this letter to your ministry on behalf of my son and family with concern regarding an article in the Tribune newspaper Thursday, the 25th February 2016 on page 8A and 9A by Adrian Gibson. I would like to assure you that this article is in no way indicative of the views and sentiments of the Gray family. We have never met the writer of said article, nor agreed to participate in the production of the article. It appears to be an article written on behalf of the Adderley family with whom we have not had any conversations or agreement in this regard. This matter is very distressing as it rehashes a terrible period in the life for my family. Upon learning of this article, we immediately undertook legal advisement and reached out to Director General Haylock to communicate to the minister that the Grays are not a part of the article. Our family remains grateful for all the assistance received from the ministry during this entire ordeal from both Nassau and Haiti teams, and in particular, Mr. Anderson. That's Mr. Crevin Anderson, the Defense Force officer who was serving down in Haiti and so diligently worked to help these families. Hugh has since returned and continues to struggle in many areas to salvage his life and career. It's our faith in God that continues to sustain us. That's from them. That's from them. And I table it at the appropriate time. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope that the Bahamian people now have a fuller understanding of what it is we are seeking to say. I'm not trying to block any public discussion. The evidence, the record will show is we attempted to find a mechanism with power to send for persons and papers to illuminate this whole issue. The leader of the other side said, no, that's not what he wanted. So we join issue in the public stage and on this floor. I don't propose, Mr. Chairman, to read this document in extenso about the performance of the ministry from the point of view of its fiscal performance, but suffice it to say that there is nothing unusual to be found in its performance. Up to the half year, I think the expenditure was at about 43% of what the expenditure was expected to be, so we were running under the 50% mark. And people would have you think that we're just busy spending, you know, up and down and so on and so forth. And the travel budget of the ministry is not the minister, because most of the work is actually done by the public officials, not the minister. So I'm going to lay all of this over. I've spoken to the opposition spokesman on foreign affairs, and I want to say this. I spoke to the opposition member foreign affairs. He's here.
You did.
Yes, right, okay, right. I take that no misunderstanding about this. I spoke to him, indicated what I would do and what the performance of the ministry is. It will be in the public domain so that if any questions arise from it, it is certainly something which can be addressed. What I do want to do, though, is to thank the people who run the ministry, our permanent secretary, Sheila Carey, who joined us last year as permanent secretary. We have a new director general, who is a Bahamian, who left her post as the highest Bahamian in the United Nations system to become the director general, Sharon Brennan Haylock. And in particular, I would like to welcome to the team, formally at this time, publicly Superintendent Clarence Russell of the Royal Bahamas Police Force, who is now the Chief Passport Officer. And of course, I'd like to thank in the Department of Immigration our Director, William Pratt, and all the officers who work so diligently to execute the policies and laws of the Bahamas in immigration. At the same time, I want to thank the outgoing Chief Passport Officer, Superintendent Franklin Dames, and the outgoing Permanent Secretary, Philip Miller, for their work in managing the ministry in the earlier years of the term. Just, Mr. Chairman, I had a very interesting meeting in Harbor Island on Thursday evening. The meeting was called in response to complaints by the residents of Harbor Island about being swamped by migrants who did not have authority to be in the Bahamas. It was a town meeting. It was fully subscribed, you know, full audience at the Anglican Church Hall. The MP was invited, but unfortunately, because of the way the House sat, was unable to make it. But there was a full and frank discussion about immigration matters and policy. And as a result, I've indicated to the Right Honourable Member for Centerville that we hope within 30 days to post, because the main complaint seems to be a lack of a fixed immigration presence in Harbor Island. And we hope within 30 days to post 2 immigration officers in Harbor Island to deal directly with the complaints of the people in that settlement. I do want to speak, however, to a broader issue, again, which I was discussing with the Right Honourable Member for Centerville, which is that very often I go to these town meetings, and here's the issue which the country faces. We are being asked, immigration is being asked, to deal with matters which are beyond the remit of immigration. We can only deal with migrant issues, incursions on the immigration law. But the deeper issues about community development are matters which, and issues for the community as a whole. And you had some very articulate members of the community. And I said to them, these are issues which you have to take up amongst yourselves. And here is the conundrum, or the issue which I think all of these communities face. I find it in Exuma. I found it in Harbor Island. I found it in the Berries, in the Member of Parliament for North Andros in the Berries, his constituency, when I went to Bullock's Harbor. I found it to a lesser extent in Grand Bahama, but you also find it in Bimini. And that is this. There's a lot, the communities, the indigenous community, if you want to use that word, is surrounded by great wealth. There's a lot of wealth. And the question is, how does that wealth, which is in private hands, convert itself into public goods? That is, the roads, the airports, the lights, the water, and those public goods. Our tax system does not, but for the VAT system, where we're attempting to recover more of the external costs of all of these aspects of our life, has not so far been able to carry all the things we want. So you hear increasingly our Minister of Tourism, the Minister for Investments, the Prime Minister talking about public-private partnerships as a way to capture some of those external costs and convert the private wealth into public wealth and a public good. The point I made earlier about the pricing point for immigration products is, again, another attempt to capture the private wealth and convert that into a public good. What it requires is advocacy on the part of citizens and a certain diligence in their advocacy. What sometimes gets me, Mr. Chairman, is this. A lady was just fussing me out the other day. Said she came to see me back in January and asked me to clear a lot next to her house. And nothing happened from the 17th of January to now. And I can't take time out of my busy schedule to come and check for this lot being cleared. Fair enough. That's a fair comment, I suppose. First, I don't know my busy schedule. I don't know what that means. Because my busy schedule is whatever the people of Fox Hill want is my busy schedule. I've been through the corner several times, but there's some issues. You know, this country has finite resources. When you decide to do land clearing in a constituency, it's just not a matter of, say, get the tractor and go clear the land. In fact, the country assumes that private owners keep their own properties clean. But it's come to be believed that the government is responsible for making sure, for safety and other reasons, that land ought to be cleared. And I accept that. I'm not fighting City Hall on the point. The point is it takes time. But I often think to myself, wouldn't it be a nice idea if you didn't hear from me the week after you spoke to me, just give me a ring again and say, look, I came to see you last Monday. I didn't see anything happen. How about, you know, did you forget? Did you check again? But instead, you wait until the pressure builds up and builds up and builds up, and then you cuss me out when I show up someplace and say, it's all your fault. So the point I was making to the citizens in Harbor Island is that citizens have a responsibility in the democracy too. That all of us have to work together to move things forward. That's important for all of us to be engaged and engaged diligently in the exercise. I wish to speak, so that was a very, very interesting meeting, and I hope that the residents of Harbor Island are pleased with that. Mr. Speaker, I want to say also that the people of Exuma have been particularly exercised about the case of one Howard O. Brunt, which is a matter which has been outstanding for some time. This is a case which involved an investor who, it is alleged, bilked 100 or more people out of monies which was supposed to be used for a development in Exuma. The case led to an attorney being suspended from practice at the bar for a period of time. The case has also led to representations by both the Canadian and the American governments with regard to the complaints which they've received from their citizens about this. And so a complaint was initiated pursuant to Section 18 of the Immigration Act. The matter has been duly considered, and Mr. O'Brunt's permanent residence in the Bahamas has been revoked after due deliberation and according to law. This is a decision of the Immigration Board, and I hope that this is a matter which the residents of Exuma find is to their satisfaction and helps to bring a very painful chapter in the lives of their island to a close. I have no doubt, given the litigious nature of our country these days, that we may not hear the end of it, but at least from the government's point of view, it has exercised its responsibilities pursuant to law. The final point I wish to make is to address, Mr. Speaker, my constituents and the general public on the proposed amendments to the Constitution and why I intend to vote yes to all of the questions if they are put to the country.
Thank you.
And I'm inviting my constituents to vote yes.
Yes.
It starts off with this simple proposition. Having been born male in the Bahamas, I have certain privileges in the Constitution which women do not have. I wish to confer and to provide that women have the same rights as men in the Constitution. That is all these amendments seek to do. Nothing more or less. That is all these amendments seek to do. Nothing more or less. And people can seek to confuse the issue by polluting it with all sorts of other things. But the fact is, all that these amendments will do is give women the same rights that men now have in the Constitution, but for one issue, and that is the question of single men being able to confer citizenship on their children. But mainly, this is about women having the same rights under the Constitution as men. And people keep talking about, what this is going to mean and what the courts are going to say and this and that. Let me tell you something about it. We have a policy court. Like the Supreme Court in the United States, we have a policy court. And you could write anything you want, this and that and blah, 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 and so on and so forth. The policy court of the country can rule anything it wishes at any time it likes. And no one has the courage. Well, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say it's courage. But we don't want to move them. So I don't want to pollute the issue with that either. This is a simple thing. If you are male, you don't have to do anything because the rights are already there. You don't have to do anything. And so I'm going to support, I'm asking women to vote for this, and I'm asking men to vote for this. And what I want to do, Mr. Chairman, on the floor of this House, and usually I get a difficulty because I tear up sometimes when I think about this, but I want to dedicate this vote, this vote to my late mother, Lilla Mitchell, who was in every way that I could think of equal to my father. Every way. Just before I went to college in 1970, my father lost his job. And He was without a job for 3 years. So who kept the family together? I think she was Doris Johnson's secretary at the time, Ministry of Transport. I sometimes look at the women who are my secretaries now, ministerial secretaries. I say, boy, that's what my mother used to do. So for 3 years. And you're going to tell me that I'm going to vote against that? That's ridiculous. And I recall from my branch the many women who run our institutions. If you come to my branch, Mr. Chairman, and I think you were there last evening, you will find there is one, possibly two, men in the branch executive of about 13 or 14. Everybody else is female. Everyone else. They run everything. The whole constituency couldn't function without women. I told the branch I went to a church service to 7 funerals. That was the record for me one Saturday, from between 10 o'clock in the morning till 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And every church I went to, all of the roles in the churches were performed by women except the preacher. The usher, people taking up collection, people singing in the choir, people directing the choir, people playing the organ. The deaconesses, everything by women. If you look in the congregation, mainly women. So that meant if the women don't show up to church, no church. No church. You have church by yourself. Have church by yourself. And yet, we want to consign them to second-class citizens. And some people are using in aid and comfort that the man is the head of the house. Well, I agree with you. If that's what you want in your house, let him be the head of the house, except so many times around here, ain't no men in the house at all. So who's the head of the house? I said, you know, these kids, these little boys can leave home today. When they leave their mama, they go to school, they see the headmistress, the teacher, every single authority figure they run into during the course of the day is female until they get home at night. And these days, because the police now are intervening, at least in my area, they get to see males in an authority position. But other than that, women raising the children, running the household, keeping the country going. And no, we must vote no. Does that make any sense? And because some people don't have the courage to simply say, I don't support equality for women. If that's your position, say that. And we're not trying to run your household. In your household, if you want the man to be the head of the house, that's fine. But you know, there's a Woody Allen movie where a little kid says, Daddy, between you and Mommy, you know, who's the most powerful? And he says, that's easy, you know. Mommy, you know, I'm the most powerful. I'm the head of the house, but Mommy makes the decisions. Yeah, I'm in charge, but Mommy makes the decisions. You know, to the women in our country. In 2012, in 2012, the OAS reported that there were 15,000 more women on the electoral register than men. 15,000 more women than men. What does that mean? I told the branch yesterday. If all the men stay home, the women could pass this by themselves. That means, or if put another way, if every man votes against it and the women vote for it, it passes like the breeze. So to our own organization, our own PLP organization, I wrote them a letter. And I always get up in their business. I threatened once to run for chairman of the women's branch. They wouldn't let me. They disqualified me. And I said, if you all want this to pass, women have to mobilize women. And I'm saying, tackle these teenage girls in high school and tell them why it is important at this time to support this campaign. Daughter Murphy did an interview with the Elks, who was with the Elks Civil Liberties Department. And she was interviewed in Marion Bethel's Womanish Ways. And she was praising Ms. Mabel Walker, who was the head of the Elks Civil Liberties Department. And she said, you know, Ms. Walker came to us with this petition. The petition said, we must sign it because we want to give women the right to vote. Say, now, I'll tell you the truth, we didn't know what Ms. Walker was talking about. But because she was the leader, and she said, sign, they signed. That was 1958, 59. Women got the vote for the first time in 1962, and I remember that. I was 9 years old. There was still a property vote. And my mom had owned 2 pieces of property, one in Armstrong Street and one in Centerville and Collins Avenue. And she could vote in those 2 places. Sammy Isaacs, our cousin, was running for the Eastern District against Pop Simonet. And so she went up to vote in the city, in Armstrong Street, and then vote in the Eastern District for our place in Collins Avenue. I remember that, clear as day. We were proud, too, because our cousin won in '62 in the Far East, Arthur Hanna, where my great-grandfather and his grandfather were brothers. So that was 1962. So I'm saying that for all those reasons, Mr. Chairman, I would ask, when the vote comes, if it comes to that, let us support the vote for women in this referendum, which is to be put to the country. And I hope that members who are on the other side of the House really go out and openly support this. Because I heard when the matter went up to Senate some very interesting maneuverings, put it that way. But I think one of the members here even said it before, that actually he's just facilitating this. You know, they don't want to block the people from having the right to vote, but it's a very passive kind of thing. So it was given the impression that, you know, you have to win this one by yourself. So I hope that it is a full court press for that to be done. And that we will have that amendment to the Constitution which will give women the same rights as men under our law and our Constitution. I hope that also, Mr. Chairman, that the public is now aware and understands what it is we've been trying to say here all day. That they have a full appreciation of what it is we're trying to establish with regard to our reputations and to defend that reputation. The Minister of State for Finance, the Minister of Finance, have all done a good job in marshaling the country's money and saving us from a crisis. And we are here in this mid-year budget debate trying to encourage them to keep on keeping on despite all of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that may come their way. It's a remarkable privilege to be in this place, and I've listened to everybody as they've spoken so proudly of the roles they play in government. And we are going to continue to fight any attempt to smear and besmirch the names of our colleagues, our supporters, our friends, and the brand name Progressive Liberal Party. And why do we have to do that? Why do we have to do that? I had the experience a couple of weeks ago of some 12th graders who came to see me. They wanted to talk to me about immigration issues. So as they started peppering me with questions, I started asking them questions back. And I said to them, I had three questions I asked them. I said, could you tell me what you know about the settlement of the Bahamas? Like, how was the Bahamas settled? Now, I thought this is an easy question because all through, we're taught the loyalists and their slaves, the black people came from the Carolinas, they outnumbered the white people for the first time after the Civil War, and blah, 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 and that's why we eat grits, and the rest of the Caribbean doesn't eat grits, and all the rest of it. I thought that was a story everybody knew. And the great untold story, of course, is the Haitian migration in the 19th century and the late 18th century.
And the free black slaves.
So, answer from them, blank. That was question number one. Question number two. Well, we were having a dialogue, so they pretty soon found out what settlement meant. I mean, So I told them that little story about how we got to the area. So question number two is, I said, do you know who H.M. Taylor was? I didn't want to choose someone who was so obvious, like Lyndon Pinley. I figured they'd know Lyndon Pinley. I chose H.M. Taylor because he's basically within their lifetime. And he may have died a couple of years before they got into high school. But not only that, he's a former governor general. And there are only about 8 or 9 of them. So they should know every governor general from Milo to H.M. to Gerald Cash to Ivy Dumont, right on up. Should know all of them to the present. Guess what? Blank. Not one. Not one. It's the 12th grade. Now, this one I thought was a real easy one. Real easy one. I said, do you know the date of the abolition of slavery? Well, I thought that was easy. Blank. And I thought that was easy because that's a public holiday. It's a holiday every year in August. You do it. And, you go to the beach and stuff. So I figured you know what you're going to the beach for. But, nope. Nope. Blank. Now, the reason I tell that story is because I realized then, if I didn't realize it before, how important history is. Because history gives you a sense of who you are, your identity. You know what you are when you walk out on that street every day. It tells you who you are. And to bring that into this present context, we in the Progressive Liberal Party, who are the leaders today, we know who we are. And how we got here, and what we stand for, and what we are guarding. And that's what we're defending here today. So, Mr. Chairman, I commend this mid-year budget statement to the House. I support it, and I will lay over the full statement of the Ministry's performance for public perusal on the table of the House. And I thank you all for your attention.